Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show I'm recording in a closet, by the way, in Tucson. Why am I in Tucson? Well, Scott Huesing and I are on the hashtag Ride for the Brave ride that we're doing from Southern California to South Carolina, SC to SC, and then back to Southern California again. So if you want to track what we're doing and our progress, you can do that at, Instagram's probably the best place, savethebrave.org. savethebrave.org. Or you can track us on Facebook. And of course, if you follow me on social media or Scott, Echo, and Ramadi, you can follow the progress of our trip. Why are we doing this? Scott lost someone close to him, a veteran, basically drank himself to death before the age of 50. And Scott's going to go do the eulogy and help through the service to close out his life. We're tired of the messages that another veteran's killed themselves. People that we know, people that our people know. And so we said, hey, it's time to get up and get moving. And look, it's COVID. We got to be careful. But people are still out there ending their lives when they don't need to. And we're doing our damnedest to fight that. So if you want to help, be part of that. You can always go to savethebrave.org and drop a couple of dollars in there and help us to help these people. The other thing I want to say to you is that we actually have a show today, and it's going to be a busy week. We are dropping the Prison Chronicles on Wednesday. So by the time you listen to this, they could well be out. So Wednesday, the Prison Chronicles drop episodes 1 through 4. We'll follow up next month with 5 through 8, and then there's all kinds of bonus materials. Okay, the next thing I want to tell you is that today we have David Ignatius, who is a writer for the Washington Post. He's an expert on the Middle East. His part-time gig is writing fiction, and he wrote a book called The Paladin, which is a spy thriller. So I had him on because, hey, I know spy stuff, and this is what we want to talk about. But also, he and I have a little bit of a connection back during my days in Iraq. We were exchanging emails, talking about some things. And so we were able to reconnect, even though he probably didn't remember it. Either way, you'll enjoy this episode. We talk a little bit about tradecraft. And listen, whatever you've heard David talk about this book before, you've never heard this version of it because it turns out when you have someone who knows the stuff, it's a lot more interesting. So down and dirty real fast. Here comes David Ignatius. Go to Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Support the ride.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
This is David Ignatius, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Ignatius. I gave it a shot. I thought it was Ignatius. I thought it was more Latin-based. Okay, so David Ignatius has written the book Paladin. You guys, I'm going to show you again here on the video. It's fantastic. And as David, I don't know if you know, but I'm a counterintelligence agent from my Army days. You and I used to interact a little bit via email during the mid-2000s, talking about Iraq and the Mideast, and just a few emails. I'm positive you wouldn't remember, but you've given your book to someone who knows the spy world and intrigue and all those kind of things. And I will tell you, I loved it. I thought the book was fantastic.
I'm delighted. You couldn't say a nicer thing. You're the reader who I want to like the book, but I'm always scared we'll say, no, it's not like that.
Well, I mean, it is like that. You've really picked something that if you've not put your finger directly on the pulse, you probably put it directly in front of it. Like this stuff is coming, deep fakes and misinformation is happening all the time. It's what inspired this?
So we're all living through the same experience of how easy it is to manipulate information. We increasingly mistrust the information that's coming at us, and for good reason. We don't know whether it's been cooked, spun. The 2016 presidential election, whatever you think about it,
right,
is an example of how vulnerable we are as a country. I mean, we've been spun up now for 4 years about the allegations that emerged about Russian meddling. I believe that they did.
Right.
I think the evidence is pretty solid. But, as you know from your background, the issue going forward is we're not going to be dealing just with fake news that's put on our Facebook feed, news that's, in some way amplified by intelligence services. We're going to be dealing with fake events, with events that never happened, with video and audio imagery that appears to be completely accurate and reliable, but was made by a computer. We're already there in terms of the technology, Pete. So it's, it's happened. The deployment of these tools in the intelligence world is coming, and my novel really is an attempt to think about what's over the next hill, about how the CIA dispatches a young officer to try to penetrate a group that's mastering these techniques. It's an assignment that is illegal because this group calls itself a news organization, and that's a no-no. You're not allowed to do that at the CIA. He gets indicted and convicted and sent to prison. He's left hung out to dry.
Right.
And so the book's really his effort to figure out, who were these people? Who took me down? Why did they do it? But as I say, this is going to be a real life problem, not a fiction problem for all of us.
This is an important point because regardless of what you think of either candidate or either outcome, well, here's the thing, and then this is not in any way pointed at you, but when the president, as erratic as he is, when he says fake news and everybody keeps obliging him, it only makes the problem worse because everybody's enriching themselves on his erratic behavior. So you can, this happening a number of times where they put out a story that's proven to be wrong because they wanted to be first, and then maybe the retraction happens, but the damage has been done. And in a lot of ways, like, you use financial markets to make this happen. But whether or not you like the president, there's always another one coming. And if you can write whatever you want and go, oh, sorry, retraction, it's too late. The news is broken. It's spread. It's gone viral. It's a terrible way to run business.
The facts don't catch up with the misstatement. Every time you misstate it, you reinforce in people's mind the initial false statement. And I think President Trump, whatever you'd say about him, is a genius at the use of these communications techniques. He'll get a nickname for somebody or a little side jab, and then every time the subject comes up, he'll repeat it, and it takes on a life of its own. I mean, my hope is that in the end, people will understand this comes down to us. We need to be smart consumers of information. We're going to get the news sources that we deserve. I mean, if we click on stuff that's got a lot of spin and, it's kind of serving up what we'd like to hear and tells us all of our favorite people are really wonderful and that the people we hate are terrible, we'll just get more of that. And if on the other hand, we value careful, believable, unbiased, unpredictable in its lack of bias source of information, those will get stronger. And I'll just say one more thing, because I think this is important when we think about our lives, in the economy, when we're trying to decide on investments. The value of true information is going to increase as there's more false information polluting the stream that's coming toward us. And we'll pay a lot, right? I mean, who wouldn't pay a lot of money to make sure that the drinking water in their house was clean? And you may be surrounded by, bad water, but you don't want it in your house.
Yeah.
And so that's my hope and prayer is when it comes down to the safety and reliability of the information coming at you, you don't want it polluted. You want it believable, and you'll pay for it. And so the people who offer it will make more money, and gradually, I hope and pray, we'll have a more reliable, safer information environment.
Yeah, your book reminded me of a book I had read while deployed about the history of poker. And, cons are cons. They have the people, and the cons themselves really don't change over time. And they talked about how ubiquitous cheating was, before, cards really became, like the bicycle deck was a standard thing. And even then, they're still cheating. But, these guys would do all kinds of things to create a false sense of quality information. And then the ones that were great at it never got caught because they would just turn a couple of hands. Yeah. Just always end up a little ahead. And the ones that got caught and shot were the ones that were just, were greedy. But this is the same kind of thing where, like, using deep fakes or just reconstituting the facts. I mean, you look at, and I'm not trying to talk a whole bunch about COVID, but you look at all of the information that has come out that disagrees with itself, and then people who take what they read in that truth and make a totally different truth. It is impossible to know what to do, which again further divides us. It's expensive, but in general, we're really suffering for the quality of information. Is it even possible to put a clear signal out, do you think?
So I think it's getting more difficult, and I think people need to, as with a signal, you need to make sure that each relay point is strong and not subject to being broken or altered. Taking COVID-19, which obviously we think about constantly, as an example, it's just a fact that when COVID-19 emerged, the Chinese response was that of a police state.
Yeah.
This was destabilizing. And the reaction of a police state is, suppress it. So the docs in Wuhan who said, hey, there's something going on here. We got all these people with respiratory. Those docs who tried to circulate news to other docs were literally put into prison. There's one who became a famous martyr, Dr. Li, who Chinese people just love. They go to a website that's a memorial to really kind of bare their souls to him. And in January, as the severity of this became clear to the Chinese, they continued to try to manipulate and suppress information. That's not a Trump Pompeo talking point. That's true. I mean, I have to assure that from my own reporting. And I have come to think the two things. I've really looked at this. The idea that this was engineered in a Chinese laboratory deliberately, I think there's no evidence whatsoever of that. And again, you have to, so I've looked in all the medical journals, I've talked to the scientists, there's no evidence for that. Anybody who believes that kind of conspiratorial talk, nothing to back that up. But there is some reason to think that this might have been some kind of laboratory accident. We have laboratory accidents in America, even with very toxic substances. They do happen. And what we should say, and 100 countries around the world, including Russia, ended up joining in this, what we should all say to China is, you need to investigate this. You need to take this seriously. It's really interesting. When the WHO, World Health Organization, a part of the UN, put this to a vote, it got 100 countries backing the resolution, including some friends of China. And the Chinese finally backed down and said, they said, absolutely not, we're not going to do that. How dare you? So there's now going to be an international investigation that I hope will be credible. So that's the world I want to live in, where everybody says, no, it's not acceptable to suppress this information. It's too dangerous. We insist. And hopefully we do that in other areas too.
When you talk about Russian meddling into elections, here's one of the things I learned from being overseas and watching what we do. Anytime, like we said, there's corrupt everywhere. I thought, well, we're the corruptor here, So when we complained about someone messing with our elections, and literally like all the time, there are stories about us meddling in elections, like our desired outcome for an Afghanistan election. Like, who the heck are we? Like, yes, we try to be more open and free, but people are hiding stuff every single day here in the United States. How do we take ourselves credibly? Like, look at the FBI and what a mess it is right now. Again, what are the side of the political spectrum you're around? There's some real problems with these folks. Here's a fact, okay? And I'll say this. As a counterintelligence agent, there's no way that Hillary Clinton had TS on her home server and did not break a law. And when the FBI director sits up there and says, she didn't mean to, it's hard to take ourselves seriously.
So we could relitigate the Hillary Clinton,
and I'm not trying to do that. Just
emails forever. It's just a fact that administrations going back to to email. You come out of a meeting in the Situation Room and you should go to a skiff, and before you write the message to whomever describing what happened, but people don't do that, and they just don't, and they should. And it's always been handled in the appropriate way with an administrative sanction, reprimand, goes in your file, and it should. I'm not convinced that there was. I'm not saying this is good. It isn't. But it's very common, and she shouldn't have had top secret stuff on any of these platforms. I think that the point you were making a moment ago about the hypocrisy on America's part, we have been in the business of trying to manipulate other countries' elections through special activities, the term of art, as you know, covert action, we typically would call it. And, we pump information into local media outlets and do other things to help candidates. We don't come at this with clean hands. I can remember during the Iraq campaign, you were deployed for that. I can remember 4 stars talking to me about the information space. We need to be in the information space, countering the extremists. David, it's like so important that we, and you go, yeah, well, that sounds really important. You don't want the extremists to be dominating the information space, and you have to pull back and think, well, that's the way the Russians talk. The Russians regard the information space as a domain of war.
Right.
They make no bones about it. It's a domain of war, and they see war. Conflict, it's a rheostat. You dial it up and down. We think it's an on-off switch, right? You're either at war or you're not. They don't. They think it's a rheostat, and they've always got some light on. They're always doing some stuff, and I fear that we're entering that. I don't fear it. I know it. I've written this. We now have a definition of cyber and cyber conflict that says we are constantly engaged in a low-level, persistent cyber conflict. So I'm not saying we have any choice. I'm just saying people should know that. They should be aware that when they go into the information space, they're in what is regarded by other countries and us as the domain of war.
Yeah, and I specialize in the human domain, and the thing I've learned too is those generals that talk about the information space, they really could say the disinformation space, or at best misinformation space. But we don't own that space. The more we try to do it, the more detached we are from reality, and really, and this is one of the biggest lessons I learned from all my time deployed. And I've talked to thousands of people who live in these areas. It's affect over effect. If you can't create a desired affect, you will lose. It doesn't matter how many airplanes, robots, bombs, anything. None of that matters if you can't move the populace. And we struggle with that. We are bad. And this is a whole different conversation, but what are your thoughts on affect over effect?
Well, I in the early days of the Iraq war, I covered the invasion of Iraq in 2003 as a unilateral correspondent, so-called, which meant I wasn't embedded with a particular unit where you were some wonderful things. You race forward in the Humvee and saw a lot of Iraq that way. I went over the berm the day after the forces did, and was able to see what, as they raced north, was left behind. And I wrote in the first week of that war, the thing that we didn't see, and to be honest, we didn't understand. It was months before we understood it, but it was as plain as could be on the ground. And that was that there was an insurgency. And I knew that because I would go talk to people in these towns where the Americans had run through and they thought it was secure and the Iraqi army had run away. And I'd be interviewing somebody, and suddenly the person would just panic. And my translator would say, he knows the Fedayeen Saddam guy is right over there. He's going to get him. And so it was obvious they'd left a stay behind network. There was an insurgency. For 6 months, you couldn't get anybody in the green zone to say there was, and I used to, because I had a lot of contacts in the Sunni tribes of Anbar Valley. I would go up into Anbar province, go up the Euphrates, and see some of my friends. I remember a particular Sheikh Hamis from one of the tribes, and he took me into his little house, and he offered me a meal. It was, just as I look back, how on earth did I eat any of it? The sheep's eyeballs, not really what I was counting on. And I said, Sheikh, when this is over, I'd love for you to come visit me at the Washington Post. I said to a friend, this guy's watched too much Baywatch. He said, yes, I really like that. I've always wanted to have an American wife. This guy was probably 80 years old. That was, anyway, he said at the end of this conversation, if you Americans don't take our situation as Sunnis who have been overwhelmed more seriously, the strong will eat the weak and there will be nothing left here. And that was before Zarqawi began to just move like wildfire. I bet you remember those days. And it's imprinted. And I remember talking to this guy. I think there was an IED that almost got us on our way back. Go back to the Green Zone. Try to talk to one of the political officers or one of the military contacts and say, hey, you guys, out there in Fallujah, this was before the Battle of Fallujah, out there, you got something you got to deal with. I mean, and did anybody want to hear it? Well, you know the answer because you were there. No, they didn't want to hear it. They did not want to hear it. And then we know what happened. It's a tragedy how messed up that got.
Yeah, we're going to get trapped in this conversation if I don't dig us out because I have 15 things I want to say to you about that. But let's go back to the Paladin. Okay, so again, as a collector and someone that, I guess I'm more of an infiltrator than an analyzer, that kind of thing. My job is to go into town and meet people, make friends, and then find the bad folks and become their friends and get them to trust me. So I get that about this, but you also, and look, you've got a ton of experience, so the answer is obvious, but how did you get your finger so squarely on the pulse of the infiltrator? As your lead character is trying to get into these groups, that's impossible to do. That's I do it by like looking for bad people, and then I find them, and then I get closer to them. But to find a specific group that is doing a specific thing, it was totally believable. How did you pull that off?
So a lot of this is just using your imagination. You think of what's the problem set. You think, okay, how would you go about targeting if you were an intelligence agency? What would be the things that you'd care about, and then what would you need as collateral evidence to assist in the targeting? How would you go about doing the preliminary reconnaissance? What kind of surveillance would you need, and then how would you go about doing the recruitment? What would be the bait? What kind of cover would you use? You just, because you've read spy novels, we've all thought about this. I try to think about it very carefully and systematically. And over the years, as people retire from CIA or military intelligence, these are often people I've met in my travels overseas, and I'll sit down and I'll say, what if you had a problem in general like this? How would you deal with that? Like, what would be sensible practices? And so you can layer a narrative that when you say to me, and you did this, you said, it seems realistic to me. I'm really pleased, but it's the fruit of having talked to lots of people like you who did this work and say, yeah, it's kind of like this. That's how I go about it. Yeah.
It takes a certain kind of person too, though, and your character Dunn is well described. I mean, if you take folks who work in extremely dangerous environments, which infiltration is as dangerous as it can be, they're the kind of person who has enough ego and confidence in themselves that they wouldn't back down to a judge. And this doesn't spoil the book at all. This is early on where,
the book opens with him saying to a judge who just wants him to cop a plea and say sorry, and he's just mad. And he refuses, and he says the judge hits him for the maximum sentence, and he's off for a year. Yeah. So he's a stubborn guy. He's if you've read or your listeners have read Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, about people from the Rust Belt and how they feel about the world and how they feel about the way the world's treated him. That's the world he's from. He's from the outside of Pittsburgh, steel town outside of Pittsburgh. He just starts off this book ticked off, right? Yeah. And so I hope that's believable. I sure have met a lot of people in the intel business like that. I think so often in thrillers, there are characters you just never meet in real life. I mean, James Bond, drinking a martini and Aston Martin. I had, you could go around the world 50 times, you'd never meet that person. but I like to be more realistic.
And then why Pittsburgh?
So my first job was covering the United Steelworkers Union in Pittsburgh. So as strange as it sounds, because people think about me writing about foreign policy, I got my start covering the union, and I've been up and down the Monongahela, and I used to, as I my first date with my wife. We've now been married 40 years. Wow. I took her to a professional wrestling match. You're not going to believe this. A professional wrestling match in which the Jones and Laughlin South Side local union president, who was one of my number one sources, was on weekends a part-time wrestler. He wrestled with Jumpin' Johnny DeFazio, and I promised Jumpin' Johnny that I'd go see him. And I met this beautiful girl, and I said, "Will you go out with me?" And she said, "Yeah, where are we going?" Thinking, "We're going to go to the movies." And I said, "Well, we're going to Wheeling, West Virginia, to a professional wrestling match." So anyway, that's a world that I know. It was fun to bring it into this book.
Yeah, it was great. It was, and I've always wondered, because I've interviewed a lot of authors, and so I always think about, you all are present. Your voice is present in my head because I do get to talk to you guys, and these choices are always interesting. Like, on why Pittsburgh? Because I look at him like, he must be from Pittsburgh, but you're not. It doesn't go the other way. The other thing too that I was interested in with the whole vengeance thing, he manages to keep himself under control enough. I mean, obviously he's an operator. He knows, what's too much, but it's easy to let anger to get into like full vengeance and rage mode, and then undermine yourself. He still has to be palatable to the system so that they can put him back into this environment where he can, do what he's going to do.
So he, yes, he's a controlled anger machine. He does some things that are stupid that the reader doesn't really understand until you get towards the middle of the book, that help take down his marriage, his family. And you don't really understand that till you get to the middle, and that's part of his self-understanding. And I think every novel, the main character needs to have an arc where they learn things about themselves and the world. They learn enough to be smart, and then do the thing that you as a reader want them to do. I mean, a book like this, you want the hero to win. Like, you wouldn't be reading unless you're invested in him. But he needs to, often in books, certainly in this one, the hero needs to learn enough, to know enough about himself to be able to succeed and take action.
You have written a boatload of books. I was trying to count the number, and it's a little bit tough because there's more than 10 of them. But you also have a regular day job.
I do.
In case you didn't know.
I'm supposed to be writing a column right now. I don't know if it's going to get done.
What on earth forces you to do this? Because this is something you don't have to do. You're an established author, reporter. Why are you doing this?
Pleasure. I've found over the years that the experience of writing fiction and the way in which you just your conscious self, your journalistic self, just gets out of the way, and something weird and preconscious, a little like dreaming, happens. I just find that so pleasurable. It's like, I'm sure you and your listeners play sports. Like, if you're playing a sport you love, if the feel of when you hit the tee shot just right, when you get a tennis stroke just right, when you just whatever you do just right, you're not in your conscious mind. Something different's happened. And for me, writing fiction is an example of that. And when you're in that space, it's so pleasurable. You want to get back there. So that's why I keep coming back to it.
And is this something?
Plus paying tuition, I want to be honest.
Well, hey, look, if you can make money writing, you need to make money writing. And is this a design for you? Like, now that this book is done, I will write the next one and it will come out in 2022 because that's how long it takes you? Or is this like, I get moved and then the well fills up and then I write? How do you sort that out?
So I try to start with a fresh slate every time. And a lot of people, I think, to readers' pleasure, come back to the same characters, Lee Child and Jack Reacher. If you like to read Lee Child, you love that character. Lee Child said, "No, I don't want to write about it anymore." You'd be upset. Michael Connelly and Harry Bosch, same way. A lot of the people we love to read, we just get used to them. I, for whatever reason, have never wanted to have the same character recurring. I've written 11 novels. I'd like to write a 12th. Each time I try this, I'm convinced that I'm going to fall on my face. It's like, because I don't write the formula. It's not the same character. Each one is like, man, this time they are really going to find you out. They're going to. So this book happily has done well enough.
Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
So this book happily has done well enough that I think I'll be able to write a 12. That's literally the way I looked at it when I was going into it. I just want it to do well enough that I'll have another, they'll give me the dice again. It's like, I can try this again. So I'm now thinking, the book was published a month ago, roughly. I'm now thinking, okay, I think I'm going to have another chance. What's going to be about? And I'll do that for another 6 months or so. And then I'll begin to really do the reporting. I'll know pretty much what the shape of the story is. And then I'll really bang it in terms of getting the details.
And when you're banging away on the book, what kind of author are you? Are you like an hour a day kind of guy? Are you a 16-hour iron butter? What do you do?
So as I really get into it, when it really begins to take shape and has a life of its own, it takes over it. It just crowds everything else out. So I'm not. There are writers famously get up at 6 and they work on their fiction for 3 hours and they put it aside and do something else. I could never do that. Yeah. When it's going well, I do it 4 days a week. I hope it's not obvious to readers of my column how little time I'm putting into it. And Washington Post, if you're listening to this, I didn't just say that. But I just get really focused on the book in the months. It's a relatively short period of time when it's really, really intense when it's happening. Yeah. And you just need in that period, you just need to give it primacy.
Well, let me back up to when you talk about writing your day-to-day article. That muscle for you is as strong as it can be. You don't need practice. You can crank an article out. It's just like I read your book because of the topic, but I don't read a lot of the books, and it's not because I don't respect the author's work. It's just, you have to marshal your time. I have done so many interviews that I don't have to do a specific case by case preparation because I've done the work. It's behind me. I've already done it. And when you write your article, surely that must be the case where a lot of it just falls out of you. It's like,
Yeah, it's so. I mean, I like my columns to be as reported as my books. So I like them to be about something real and not just a riff on, whatever stupid thing was in the news yesterday. I columns like that don't interest me. I do like deadline pressure. So when we get off, I've got less than 2 hours to write a column. And so I love that because I just am not going to have time. I've got the reporting. I'm not going to have time to anguish over it. I just got to make it happen on paper in the computer. And again, that's pleasurable. Everybody likes certain kinds of pressure. A lot of people would freeze if you said you have 2 hours, that's it. But I'm just that weird person who likes it.
Yeah. In terms of staying relevant, you're not in your 20s anymore, but the characters you write about, there's a hipster, and there's younger people, a guy with dreadlocks, but it doesn't seem, I'm going to be critical of Tom Clancy for a second, and he's the master, but there reached a point where his ability to write in the vernacular of young people was done. I quit reading the books because I'm like, that's not how people talk. Like, just so, and look, Tom Clancy is one of the greatest authors of all time. So I just, at some point that he lost touch with that. You don't seem to have that problem. It was completely believable for you to tell me about these characters, and your description of them was not, dated. Like when you talk about the kind of clothes that they wear, it was relevant. How are you doing that?
So I asked my children what's on their playlist. I have Catholic interests in music, and I'll run things by younger people, and it's so easy, as everybody knows, for the older guy to make a complete ass of himself trying to sound hip. So I try to be careful of that. There are lots of online resources. There are dictionaries of, street slang. You can figure out what it sounds like to talk in the vernacular of lots of different social groups. And so, again, it's a question of doing the research. If you tried to sit there and think, well, I wonder what that would sound like, that's not going to work. You got to do the research.
Did you agree with that point about Tom Clancy reaching a dating in his conversation, or do you not read Tom Clancy?
I think he did get dated. He began to sort of chicken franchise, his books, and he'd have other people work on them with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that dilutes. I knew Tom Clancy, met him, and he once criticized a colleague of mine who was one of the most courageous war correspondents of his generation. I mean, this guy had seen more bad stuff and closer to, death, and he knew what he was doing. And Tom Clancy was running him down, and he's liberal, this and that. And I just thought, you've never left Annapolis, man.
Yeah,
you're an insurance salesman. How are you criticizing a guy who, humped it day after day, month after month in Vietnam, any conflict, there he was. So I just, it's kind of affected me. I've never told that story, and I know people love Tom Clancy. His books are really good, but it just bugged me to hear him criticize somebody who we didn't really know, but just thought, well, he works for the Washington Post, he must be some kind of lefty.
Some kind of damned hippie. Another question about the spycraft stuff. You live in a place where there's a lot of agencies doing a lot of tradecraft training. Are you ever aware of it? Like, do you ever go, oh, I think those guys are doing surveillance training?
So I've heard so many stories of how people come up from the farm down by Virginia Beach, where the CIA does its training, to do their street exercises, and they'll get FBI people, and there's elaborate surveillance detection runs, and so. And I know some of the places because my friends have told me where they did them, and sometimes when I'm in places where I know it's happened, I kind of look around, and you'll see, why that guy staring in the window of the store? Is he, because that's one of the sort of standard things. But not really. I mean, everybody in Washington is doing something weird. So
yeah, that's true. It is funny because I've done training in DC, and you can spot yourself in a second. So yes, you're in a distinct exercise, and you're working on surveillance in this case. But you'd be walking through, I don't know, the mall or something, and you're like, those guys are having a practice source meet. I can see it, because there's a third guy at the other table looking at right now. For those who are listening, I'm staring intently at the person at the table next to me, and they're scratching notes, and it's a great place to go do it. And then, if you want to hide in plain sight, you go to the mall and you walk around and do surveillance, because it's hard to do surveillance there and not stand out, because it's such a big area. You can quickly figure out if someone's.
One of the things that I have thought about is, when I travel overseas, when I'm in Moscow or in Beijing or Shanghai, I have to remind myself that I'm just there typically as a tourist or as a journalist. The last thing you want to do is in any way look suspicious, look like you're trying to avoid. And we all have a tendency when we're in a scary place to go look over our shoulder and you just have to just calm yourself down and remember fixed surveillance. I mean, you could be in an empty Moscow metro station, but every move you make is being watched and analyzed. And the Chinese now they don't need people on the street. They just your facial recognition. They got you everywhere you go. So and not only do they have your face, but they have your DNA. I mean, an interesting puzzle for your listeners to think about. I've thought about a little bit in my fiction is, in a world where your DNA, your facial recognition, your eyeball structure, not just your fingerprints, are all available. How do people change identities? How do they move covertly from across borders? How's that going to work? And it's a real, we leave so much digital exhaust, as people say. I'm sure you had to deal with this in your earlier work. But it's a puzzle. People, from a very early age have to stay off social media. They can't leave much because everything they do is going to be there. It's very hard to go back and readjust it.
Yeah, yeah. And when I think about that, I think about avatars, being the form of infiltration. And again, things like deepfakes and these sort of things. Joining us in the chat for a moment, listening, I don't know if he's still in, is a guy named Johnny Walker, who was my interpreter in Iraq. And he was on, get this, David, he was on so many SEAL missions in Iraq that the SEAL said, you can wear a trident no matter what. And this is an Iraqi interpreter.
Wow.
And so, and then I've got his, he calls me Dibshi and I call him Dibshi. It's the Iraqi slang word for watermelon. And that was one of our code words. So that if it was dangerous, or I'd call him, like it was sort of like our bona fides, so that we would know that we could interact and talk, or had to, cancel our meeting and everything. But even now, right now, there's a little bit of tradecraft, remnants. We're not communicating anything anymore like that, but that's when folks are like, oh, is Pete really a spy? Like, yes, there's some proof right there. That's our call and response. When you think about the kind of story you might tell next, do you have an idea? Is it framing up? And then would you go back to Dunn? It seems like this guy Dunn isn't done.
Yeah. So there is certainly room to do another Michael Dunn novel, and I'll think about it. I have another idea that I'm superstitious. I'm not prepared to talk about it. I talked about it with my wife when we were out for a walk the other day, and I said, does that sound like that work? And so she said, yeah. So I have the first test is done. I should say, I don't know if Johnny Walker is still on the line, but it's great that your interpreter, the idea of, the SEALs don't give out the trident pin.
No.
Very often. That's pretty heavy duty.
Yeah. I don't know of anybody else who's not gone through Buzz who has that honor.
Well, you must be a remarkable person. You're lucky to have worked with him. I have the same. We had Iraqi colleagues who we depended on for translation, for all the services that kept our bureau going in the dark times. And thank goodness we were able to get our people out, pretty much without exception. They're living wonderful lives here in the U.S. I watch as their kids now graduate from universities, and I just hope our country keeps faith with the people who took risks for us, the way we do as a newspaper. But it's I know that feeling. In fact, you're still in touch with Johnny Walker, and you guys are still trading the Iraqi word for watermelon. That shows a real bond.
Yeah, well, I was, and it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. We've done a terrible job at abandoning those folks who were interpreters for us, and it's shameful. We talk about all of the undocumented illegal worker situation. If there's anybody that's at the front of the line, it's these folks. Yep. And it's terrible that we've left them behind, and completely, anyhow, it'll get me fired up and going. Yeah. Johnny is wonderful. He leaves a wonderful life. And those that we are able to bring back, it's a good thing. Interpreters, I'm an expert on how to use an interpreter overseas. And I talk quite a bit about it because there is an advanced way to do it. And I imagine that, you guys as reporters must have a similar thing. There's not a lot of training for these sort of things, but, they're really an extension of you. They've got to communicate culturally instantly in a way that you and I can't do. You can be there for a year and you're not going to be anywhere near where they are. How do you deal with the interpreter piece of the puzzle when you are abroad?
Well, you need somebody, as you say, who will, get the said and the unsaid. The French say le dit et le non dit.
Yes.
And so that's important. You need somebody who gets you. The ideal interpreter will spend a little time with you before going out on the interview, just so that as they ask the question, they're conveying the kind of person who's asking it. And then they'll do that with the answer, that give you some of the background and richness that motivates the answer. I always feel it's important, even if I don't speak Arabic well enough to get in any reliable way what's said, to size up somebody. And you can tell a lot about somebody. In that culture, I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, sitting with the sheikh, and the sheikh, offering me a lunch, and he put his hand on his heart as a way of saying, "I really mean this." And when he said, "This is what's ahead," when people are really speaking from the heart. It doesn't mean they're not being manipulative in it.
Sure.
And any journalist or intelligence officer, for that matter, who doesn't understand that in every interaction with people in these other cultures, you're dealing with somebody else's agenda. But you learn to filter that. You get your filters set right, so you tune them up.
Exactly. That I talk about my dial all the time, and it's true. And our desire to get intel, the moment intel shows up, we get so excited, we throw out the possibility that we're being manipulated. And I always ask young agents, like, who's running who right now?
Yeah.
And if they don't know,
Well, I watched that over and over again. I watched the Israelis are supposed to be geniuses at intelligence. I watched a series of Lebanese militias manipulate the Israelis to a fare thee well. And they, months before the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, which ended up being a terrible mistake for Israel. But people got so good at telling them what they wanted to hear. And it's, we're all vulnerable to that. Who among us isn't, I'll say to somebody, "I really want your honest opinion of my book." That's not really what I'm saying. You're an honest person, and I want you to tell me you like my book. So if somebody says something that you want to hear, you just say, "I says such good judgment. It was so, and we're unfortunately in our intelligence collection super vulnerable to that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, because our jobs are parallel. I mean, I was an undergrad, I was a TV, radio, journalism guy. And one of the reasons why I was ahead of my peers is because I had to figure out how to find a story. I had to figure out how to develop sources already. And I wasn't a good reporter, but I had the basics in me from doing it. When you say you go to Anbar and you've got sources, good grief. Like, how the heck do you pull that off? Yeah, you've got an interpreter, but that's just a piece of the puzzle. You've got a whole puzzle put together. How do you develop a network of sources who will do things that potentially and probably have gotten them killed?
So it is a question of developing a network. In the case of Anbar, I had been going to Amman, Jordan, which is where many of these Anbar sheikhs would, stash their money and have their villas and live it up. I'd been going to Amman for so many years. I had so many contacts in the Jordanian army and security service that I knew my way around pretty well, and I knew the major tribal figures in Anbar. So as we invaded Iraq, sadly, I'm just not sure there are enough people in our government who had done the necessary spade work, so that you just have to have the feel of this on your fingertips. You have to have sat for a long time drinking coffee to get to know who to go see, to know, have a relationship of trust. Same thing with all these countries in the Middle East. I mean, I still try to keep up with everybody that I met in Lebanon, all over the Middle East, starting in 1980. I mean, that's a long time ago. That's 40 years ago. But I still, just recently was exchanging messages. And I think that's a liability we have as a country. Our CIA thinks you're not really recruited unless you can be handed on to somebody else. And so the relationships are transitory. They don't have that feel of an intense human bond. I think it's one of the things we do wrong. Russians are better at this. The Brits are much better at this. But this is about human beings and human relationships. I mean, the truth is, you can buy somebody, yeah, you can have that control. But I'm just a believer that the agents, people who really matter to the United States, probably have a different motivation, much deeper. They're not just bought. something else.
When it comes to building trust, you have to go at the pace that person can trust you. And, yes, you can buy some entry with some money. And I certainly have used money to get information. I mean, it's one of the tools of the job. But the people that were most reliable, it was built over time, like a real friendship is, because I'm very genuine and honest about what I'm doing when I'm there. Like I say, if I ask you a question you don't want to answer, don't answer. Like I'm a super agreeable guy, because I'm not going to find the bombs on day one. It's just not going to happen. I can say, hey, where are the bombs to everybody? But no one's going to talk to me about those things.
And I'll tell you, the other thing that I'm sure that you did, and I think that we do too little culturally, I think it's crucial that you keep faith with people.
Yeah.
And what that means is that as a country, we tend to seduce and abandon. Everybody's hot for Lebanon, and so we're going to buy up every Lebanese asset we can, and then the season changes. It's politically not popular. A bunch of Marines get blown up. Man, let's get out. Let's get out of Dodge, and we leave behind all these people who trusted us, and they're just and as you know better than I, that's what happened in Iraq. We left behind, and they're enraged. I have been watching this in Syria. I mean, I go in and out of Syria a lot with our special operations forces, as I write often, but I just have had an unusual opportunity to view that war. And I've seen us, these Syrian Kurds are some of the best allies we've ever had. They stand and they fight and die. You give them an objective, they do it. And we just walked away from it. All the things that this administration has done, I got to say, this is the one that just, man, it grates, because these are people who stood up. We did. How many people were killed in action in our fight in Syria when we took down ISIS, destroyed this group that was terrorizing the Middle East? 5. Do you know how many these Syrian Kurds got killed? 12,000.
Yeah. And
25,000 seriously wounded. So and they were the stand-up men and women, because there's a lot of them that we dream of having as our allies. And what did we do to them? We said, "Sayonara, Charlie." And
every time,
that's what we do. I mean, I hope your listeners just think this is something we can't keep doing. It's one of our worst qualities.
It is. Again, embarrassingly true. Interpreters, people, like if the president wanted to be bold in the Middle East, you draw a circle on the map and say that's Kurdistan, and I dare anybody to say it's not. Like, if you really wanted to do it, otherwise every incursion into Kurdistan is born in deceit, every single one. And I don't know that there is a president that should or could say that's Kurdistan, but that would be the only way to repair that thing. We are always going to walk away from them, because that's just how it is.
They're great fighters. They have been betrayed over and over again. Why they keep coming back? Lucy in the football. I don't know why Linus keeps thinking he's going to kick it.
Your analogy was better than mine. That's Well, look, let me wrap this up, because I could talk to you about this stuff for actually I have one more Middle Eastern question, because this is always interesting to me. If you could define the boundaries of the Middle East in your mind, and I'm not asking for academic, like, what's your sense? Because I've heard Morocco included, and Afghanistan on some maps. What do you think is the Middle East?
So I think of the Near East as a very integral unit that I understand well, and that's Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, those contiguous countries. Then I think of North Africa, where the Arabic sounds different. As soon as you cross into Egypt, it's a different. The G goes from a hard to a soft. As you move further west, the culture of Libya. I mean, Libya is the most tribal place I've ever been. The Romans couldn't put Libya together. They couldn't make it. The Ottomans could never make Libya work as a country. And so I think of that as, it's technically in the Middle East, but it's so nuanced. No wonder we make such mistakes. And by the time you get to Morocco, French is the second language. Moroccan Arabic is so hard for people from other parts to understand. The Gulf in the same way. So increasingly, I'll be honest, I've kind of disaggregated. I used to write about Middle East policy, like as if that had meaning. And increasingly it doesn't for me. I just need to disaggregate. And I want us to, as a country, to have people on the ground who get that, who know that Oman is not the same as the country next door, the United Arab Emirates. It's got different culture, traditions. It's got different kind of Islam, different worship practices. Anyway, someday, hopefully we'll get out of the Middle East. We won't have to worry about this, but that never seems to happen. To the extent we stay, you and I, we need to find a way to share what little we learned.
Yeah, if they'll listen. I can share all I want, but if no one's listening, let me say. But do listen to this, though. This is The Paladin. It's from David Ignatius. It's a fantastic book. One spy saying a spy novel that I thought was just fantastic. Real. I stopped thinking like a spy and started reading like an actual reader. I really enjoyed the book. The link is on the page. You can always get the link in the show notes. And I think the world of you. I appreciate you talking to me back in the mid-2000s. It's neat. I'd love to hang out sometime in DC when we're all able to do these kind of things.
Well, when you're back, I love this conversation. You and I track a lot of the same terrain, and I have a feeling this isn't the last conversation we'll have.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Hey, thanks a lot. Great conversation. Take care.